Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give it about 20 seconds and then we'll get started just to let a few people join. I see we have lots of people joining right now, so we'll just hang tight for a second and get started. All right, we'll get started with just some housekeeping, I think, and then we'll jump right into things. So welcome everyone to Bow Valley's Alberta Narratives Project webinar. We're really excited to be hosting this, being hosted by Bow Valley Climate Action with support from Banff Canmore Community Foundation, as well as the Pembina Institute. And it's going to be 1 hour long, our webinar. So if at any stage you do need to hop off, it is being recorded. So you'll be able to check back to the Bow Valley Climate Action Facebook page, and I'll put that link in the chat, and we'll put the recording there. And then just a note, if you have any questions as we're going throughout the presentations, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A button, and feel free to throw those questions in at any time. And after the presentations, we've allotted about 15 to 20 minutes to be able to answer as many of those as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Ripley, who is the president of the Bow Valley Climate Action Group, to kind of introduce what we're doing tonight and introduce our speakers as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Shannon.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thank you, and a huge welcome to each and every one of you who are with us tonight, who've been able to make time to join this workshop. As Alyssa said, I'm a volunteer chair with the Bow Valley Climate Action Society. And first off, I would like to say a huge thank you to all of the volunteers who've helped to make this event tonight possible, and in particular, Alyssa, who is just on, who has really done all of the main organizing to make this possible. And we're really excited about this workshop. It's a topic we've thought about for the last few years as an organization, and how we would really appreciate some training through the Alberta Narratives Project to learn how to become better communicators on the topics of climate change and energy transition, which, as we all know, can be complex topics to chat with people sometimes. And I know I speak for myself, and I would imagine many of you on this webinar maybe have found yourself in a challenging social situation whenever you start talking about climate change or energy transition, and suddenly realize that maybe it feels a little awkward or the conversation is difficult. And I know myself, I've wished at times I've had more tools to be constructive and positive, but also work one's way through the conversation with the other person who one cares about. I want to welcome each and every one of you who are here. We have many participants from across the Bow Valley. We also have some participants from other parts of Alberta and even from British Columbia and perhaps other parts of Canada. Each and every one of you are very welcome here, and we're so glad you're with us this evening. I would like to specifically acknowledge the original stewards of this land in the Bow Valley. We're on the land of the First Nations of Treaty 7. These are the traditional lands of the Stoney Nakoda people, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nation, the Chiniki First Nation, the Wesley First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I myself am incredibly grateful to live on and be taken care of by this land, and to honor this place together with people of all nations who live here. And I am very committed to doing the very best I can in daily life and each of my actions to further truth and reconciliation. I'm going to give a brief introduction to Bow Valley Climate Action Society. Alyssa, if you might be able to advance the slide, please, that would be great. Thank you. We're a local nonprofit volunteer organization that promotes citizen engagement and action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the Bow Valley. We've been working together now for about 2 years. We have about 20 very active members who are volunteering on a weekly basis in various initiatives, and we have more than 180 local citizens who have signed up for our newsletter and are deeply concerned about climate change and following and taking part in our various activities. We believe that both individual and collective action can make a difference. And one of our main goals in our work as Bow Valley Climate Action so far has been to support our local communities in enacting and following through with their ambitious climate action plans. Um, this is the first event of a series of educational events that are part of a project we call Envisioning and Preparing for Our Low Carbon Future. We're very excited for this event to kick off these activities, and we're incredibly grateful to the Banff Cameron Community Foundation. And just today we found out that the town of Banff has also contributed some funds towards this project that you see today, this event today, and then the coming activities that will be happening over the coming year, which will include educational events on electric vehicles, on energy efficiency in buildings, and also around decision making on food and thinking about climate change related to food. So in addition to hosting public education events such as this one, we currently have a number of project teams as part of Bow Valley Climate Action, including topics on work on transportation, buildings, municipal election, which is coming up this fall, and also an advocacy project team. We always welcome new volunteers, and if you're interested in learning more, our website is there, bowvalleyclimateaction.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, and also in the Get Involved section of the website, you can also make donations to our organization. So I would like to take a brief moment to say a huge thanks and introduce our two main speakers this evening, who are Laura Hughes with the Pembina Institute and Hilary Young with the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. We are very grateful to Laura, who will be leading today's workshop. Laura is a senior analyst in the Alberta Clean Energy Program with the Pembina Institute, which is Canada's leading energy think tank. She manages the Alberta Narratives Project and has facilitated workshops similar to the one we're going to participate in this evening for people all across Alberta from a lot of different backgrounds. Laura works with the Pembina Institute on nature-based climate solutions and leads Pembina's national file on women in energy transition. And a special thank you to the Pembina Institute, who is participating in this workshop free of charge, thanks to donors of their own who've supported Laura's work in this area, which we're very grateful for. And so following the main part of this webinar, which will be facilitated by Laura, we're very grateful to have with us Dr. Hilary Young with the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. Many of you here in the Bow Valley will know Hilary from her work in the conservation field. She's the Senior Alberta Program Manager with Y2Y and leads Y2Y's Alberta program. Hilary will be sharing some of her learnings around this topic of the careful use of language to find common ground when we work on complex topics of environmental and community concern. And again, a huge thank you to Hilary, who's here as a volunteer tonight, and we really appreciate her taking time out of her evening and away from her family to be with us. So I'll turn it over to Laura to take it away. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Shannon. It was a lovely introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, someone just yell at me if something's not going well. So as Shannon said, my name is Laura Hughes. I'm a senior policy analyst with Pembina Institute. Been with Pembina for 2 years now. Who is Pembina? For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are Canada's leading clean energy think tank. We're based primarily out of Alberta, but all over the country now as well. And we advocate for strong, effective policies to support Canada's clean energy transition. Just building off of what Shannon said, I really like that there's people from all over Alberta here tonight. And it's so rare that we have climate action groups or people concerned with climate who actually get to convene in Alberta. And I know that we know each other exists theoretically, but it's so rare to see each other. So I actually wanted to encourage you to put in the chat to everyone where you are tonight, where you're listening from, who you are, who you work with, just what your name is. I think it's a great opportunity to see each other and realize that you're not alone in caring about these things that can often feel a little lonely to care about. So I just wanted to encourage you to throw that in the chat. Who are you? What's up with you? We'd love to know. Before I dive into content, I just wanted to talk a little more about Pembina and what we're thinking about right now. Given that we're a think tank on clean energy and climate policy, I wanted to just brief you quickly on what our priorities are right now. Obviously, the COVID recovery is presenting a massive opportunity to put a down payment on our future in Alberta and in Canada. And we think that this is a tremendous opportunity to do this in a way that advocates for equity and net zero policies and climate action. So I just wanted to say, what is net zero? Why are we thinking about this? How are we defining this? At Pembina, we believe that the primary road to net zero is through emissions reductions. This looks like, first of all, reducing the emissions that we're producing. Second, removing the emissions that we are producing. And boom, net zero. Pretty simple math. Just reducing one, getting rid of the other. For those of you who think that net zero might have a threat of reduced jobs, hey, we've got lots of jobs that we're looking forward to seeing in our net zero economy. We project there will be 67,200 new jobs in our net zero economy, which will nearly entirely replace any jobs out of the oil and gas sector. Not that we're going to lose all of those jobs, but there will be job security, and we're looking forward to seeing those skills transferred. Net zero has massive global support. There's 126 countries that have expressed interest in or pledges to reach net zero. There are a lot of oil and gas companies doing the same right now, and even we did a survey late last year, showing that 68% of Albertans actually want to transition to net zero, which we are very encouraged by. Here's just a few of the energy companies who have recently pledged to reach their net zero targets. And what are our obstacles that we're thinking about internally? We are trying to figure out how to reduce emissions from oil and gas. We're trying to advance both production and procurement of renewable energy. We want to create a hydrogen industry. We want to reduce emissions from both transportation and from buildings. And we want to make sure that workers are supported through this whole process, and that we see an equitable transition. Okay, so now that Pembina is covered, tonight's plan. So first of all, I'm going to briefly introduce you to what is the Narratives Project. Second, I want to talk about how to tap into Albertan values. Third, I want to think about tapping into the values of other people unlike yourself. And then I'm just going to go through a quick summary of what we found, what did not work and what does work according to the work that we've done. And then I'll give you some takeaway principles, and my slides will be available afterwards. So what is the Alberta Narratives Project? Well, 2 or 3 years ago, a couple years ago now, the Pembina Institute convened Albertans from every corner of the province. We gathered people from 75 organizations around Alberta, including anyone who we could possibly conceive as Albertan. So oil and gas workers, energy executives, healthcare workers, youth, seniors, faith groups, new Canadians, anyone we could perceive as Albertan. We convened them into the room, and this is a picture of that actual workshop, and we spent 2 days with everyone discussing how to have roundtable conversations with their peers about climate and energy in a really open and honest and candid way, that by them hosting it, we actually removed scientists from the room. So without a scientist scribbling on a piece of paper, we created an atmosphere that actually allowed for really genuine, honest, candid conversations about climate and energy. And from that, we've derived how we want to talk about this in this province. This project was supported by a lot of organizations. This is just a few of them. We are really, really proud of how much Albertans came together around this work and wanted to see the same objectives as each other. This was really encouraging to us. Our primary partners were Alberta Eco Trust and Climate Outreach, who are out of Wales. They're the world leaders on climate communications. So the outcome of all these workshops was 75 organizations, 482 people involved in these conversations, and my favorite stat is the 2,400 pages of marked up narratives and transcripts that we analyzed to find our results. My apartment was a disaster. There was pages on the walls and the tables and the couch and everything. So little taste of, we pulled a couple little quotes to set the tone and start understanding what we are working with here. And I wanted to share some of the quotes with you before we dove in any further. So, I'm not a denier, but at the same time, I believe climate change is being used as a political tool to push a certain agenda. It's like a religion. From an energy professionals group. If I say climate change is real, maybe my son won't have a job if we have to shut off the tap tomorrow, from a rural group. And sure, I'm concerned about climate change. My concern is the people that are using climate change to disrupt my livelihood. So we'll come back to that. Right now, I want to talk about tapping into Albertan values. So this is, I'm not going to make anyone go on screen. I'm not going to put you in breakout rooms. It's too much for a Tuesday evening. We've had enough of Zoom stuff. But what I do want is for you to interact with me via the chat. So if I'd like you to think about what makes you proud of being Albertan or living in Alberta. What makes you proud of this province and proud to be here? I would love to see anything that comes to mind. What are you proud of about this province, about the people in this province? What makes you proud to be Albertan? If you could enter it in the chat to all panelists and attendees. Our Rocky Mountains, Alberta community spirit. Yeah, absolutely. The mountains and the outdoors in my backyard. Speaking my language, Avery. Beautiful outdoors. The way we stand up for our recreation areas, camping foothills, and the No to the Coal campaign. Entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah, absolutely. Again, entrepreneurial spirit. Nice. So exquisite landscape, amazing environmental diversity. Yeah, great energy and a can-do attitude. Nailed it. Those are wonderful. So yeah, feel free to throw in more if you want. I'm going to keep chatting. Those are all excellent responses. So we actually found very, very similar to what you're saying. So that makes me pretty happy to see. We heard that Albertans are proud of their great quality of life. We have great nature, we support each other, we work really hard in Alberta. We're innovators in this province, and things happen in Alberta. So if you think of that as your audience, and Albertan as your audience, you can already start to build a narrative of common ground and things that you have in common that you care about and want to protect. So you can begin to build a narrative already. And you can say, as an Albertan, this is something that you care about, our nature, our beautiful landscapes. And other Albertans who are just like you completely agree with you about this. And when you take climate action to protect these spaces, you are actually being a great Albertan by doing that and belonging more to Alberta by doing that. And therefore the world becomes more how you want it to be. So that's just a little summary example of how do you tap into the values of another person and speak to their values in a way that you speak their language by engaging in this way. And so in a dream world, I would actually have you do little breakout groups and try to tap into the empathy around a whole bunch of other groups. But I'm actually just going to ask you, for those of you who feel so inclined, to grab a sticky note or a little piece of paper. And again, I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but I kind of want to work with our brains a little bit more here. So tapping into the values of others. So how do we speak to someone who we aren't necessarily the same as? So I would like you to pick one of these identities. I want you to pick whichever one you can relate the least to. So oil and gas worker, person of faith, business owner, youth, rural Albertan, pick one that you just don't even have any friends that are in that group, or at least as few as possible. I'm gonna give you a second to grab a pen and give a little more thought to who you're gonna think about in this little exercise. I can come back to this list too if you like. And I realize that this is weird because I can't see you and I don't know how much time you're gonna need, but I wanna do this. So what I want you to do is draw a little empathy map. And it doesn't have to be a map, it can just be some point form bullet points on your piece of paper, whatever feels right to you. But I want you to sit in the persona of this other person for 3 minutes. And I want you to think, if I am an oil and gas worker, what do I say about climate change, or what do I think about climate change? And those are probably different things. So what do I think about it? What do I fear about it? What do I then say as a reaction to my thoughts? What do I do about climate change? And what do I feel about climate change? So this is a bit of a mind bender at first, but I would just like to give you a minute or two to think through this. And again, here's your options of who. And then I'll put it back to the map again. And if I had an extra hour, we would go around in circles and talk about 20 different subgroups and what you've found with them. But I want you to just put a little bit of thought into this right now. And if anything does jump out at you, feel free to type it in the chat and share it with other people of just what your thought process is through this experience. And I was going to force you into breakout groups, but I know that we all have better things to do than be in a video chat right now. So this is my compromise. An example would help. Okay, I'll just talk us through a quick example. So I'm going to do an oil and gas worker, and I'm just going to stand in their shoes for a minute. So what do I think about climate change? Perhaps I'm not totally sure what I think about climate change. A lot of my friends are mentioning things that they've saw on social media that might be a little bit skeptical. Maybe my family says different, and I'm just a little, I'm going to go into the feel. I probably feel a bit nervous about that, because people who are saying that climate change is real are saying that my job isn't going to exist anymore. So I don't know what this is about, but if I don't have a job, if I say climate change is real, I'm probably going to then start speaking with the denial side of things, and until I understand otherwise, I'm going to defend my job. And I think as a result of that, I'm probably going to work on spreading the word that it's not necessarily maybe what people are saying it is. And where I'm coming from when I say that is, as an oil and gas worker, and this is not all oil and gas workers, to be extremely clear, this is very stereotypical. Like, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of someone who I'm picturing in my mind, one person. I probably value hard work and that I provide for my family, and I value, how much energy I've put into my career to date. And I value the fact that I do put a lot of physical effort into my work, and I see the reward of that, and look what I've done for my family as a result. So I might feel that those values are very threatened by this climate change conversation. So, this is just this is one person in my head. I am not saying this is every oil and gas worker, but I find that just helping by walking through these stages, it can help you start to understand where the other person might be coming from, and where they might be on this spectrum of understanding and willingness to engage in the climate conversation. And perhaps any animosity that they would have towards the conversation is not out of anger or choosing to be on an argumentative standpoint of anything, as much as perhaps it's coming out of fear of the loss of what I value. So I would love to work on this more, but I just wanted to introduce you to this concept and get you thinking about this moving forward. Yeah, I'm not going to put anyone else on the spot, but I wanted to introduce this concept, and I would encourage you to think more about how you can apply empathy mapping and thinking about other people's values to your conversations and to your communications when you're talking about this, because ultimately speaking to people's values is what will be helpful and productive. I hope that makes sense. So maybe we'll come back to that in the Q&A period. I'm going to move forward. So after talking to all of these different groups, many of whom I have just mentioned, the subgroups that I just mentioned, where we worked very closely with them, we found a handful of narratives that do and do not work. And I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the results of this work that we found. So what we found does not work with general Albertans. And again, this is for all Albertans, and there will always be subgroups that this does not apply to, but I ask you to use your judgment. Green absolutism is not a helpful point in a conversation. So what that means is climate change is absolutely the single greatest threat to our planet. Whether or not that's your opinion is a different scenario, but that absolutism does not typically result in productive conversation. That renewables are perfect in every way, again, not productive. This implies, frankly, to the audience that you don't understand the nuance of what you're speaking about and that you don't respect that nuance. The idea that oil is dirty and destroying the world, again, very absolute, this is bad, this is good. And the concept of shut off the taps is just not a productive conversation space in Alberta. Elite light, as we call them, is government speak. So speaking to economic costs and Alberta being the best in the world and talking about investments in markets, frankly, no one talks in this language around their kitchen table or on their couch at night with friends and family. This is government speak, and it is unrelatable, and it's not approachable and not a good way to start a conversation about climate. Excuse me. Politicking. So again, very similar. The messenger is one of the most important things. Speaking peer-to-peer is going to be eternally more impactful than being talked down to by an authority or someone who's unrelatable. So speaking to your peers is one of the best things that you can do to have climate conversations. We tested the idea of a Made in Alberta plan as a narrative, and it actually did not work. We found that a lot of Albertans actually move here because of opportunity and something they're passionate about in the landscape, and they're not necessarily exclusionist in that way. So rejecting Ottawa is not really helpful. Talking about the experts say this or that, no, not helpful. And pipelines, we did not actively test the pipeline narrative. We wanted to see if it came up organically, and it did not. It came up in one conversation, and it resulted in a tense conversation that fizzled out very quickly. So we recommend not discussing pipelines. Narratives that can work. Having gratitude for our good life. So all of the things that make us proud to be Albertan, we can have gratitude for those. I do my best to lead every single climate conversation with explicit gratitude for what oil and gas has done for me, because it has done a lot for me. I drive an SUV into the mountains every weekend, many weekends. I heat my home with gas. I do not pay a provincial sales tax because of what oil and gas has done for Alberta. So I have absolutely benefited from the oil and gas sector. It's very important to be clear that we respect people who work hard in the oil and gas sector. They are just doing what is aligned with their values, working hard, providing for their families. They are not the enemy. Oil and energy resources are precious and should be valued. Everyone agreed with this. Waste, not great. We should absolutely be more careful with how oil and gas are used. And honesty, being very frank and open, admitting that the shift is not easy. While we can see pathways to success, it is a lot of work to get there. And just like how I spoke to the nuance earlier, by acknowledging that it's not simple, it's not easy, it's not going to be straightforward, you're showing that you're willing to engage in a more complex conversation, and you're more approachable and easier to engage with when you do that. Acknowledging that it's challenging and complex, and that we can work together. Someone mentioned the community value as Albertans. This is, again, we can work together as Albertans to overcome this challenge. The word protect had a lot of positive responses. We love our quality of life and we want to protect it. We have this nature, landscape, clean air and water that you guys all mentioned, and we would love to protect that. So this is a great way to have conversation that's productive and shares common ground. Facing a challenge, we work together. Great example is the 2013 flood or the fires in Fort Mac. Look at how Albertans pulled together. We actually have 8 of the 10 most costly natural disasters in Canadian history have all happened in Alberta, which is horribly unfortunate. But what a narrative of us coming together under adversity. We pull together, support, protect each other. So making sure that you mentioned that this includes everyone. So I had mentioned feeling, potentially someone who might feel that their job is threatened, feeling very fearful around the climate and energy conversation. So making sure that we're talking in a way that is inclusive of all sectors and everyone, not just necessarily some energy people, but agricultural groups are a huge part of our net zero targets and our energy transition. We need to be talking about how we're handling agriculture and making sure that we create space for voices of all groups, specifically Indigenous people and settlers, New Canadians, and women, which Pembina is now diving into. Again, security is another really strong word. So safety, security, protection, coming together. So we are too dependent on one sector. This is a narrative that works. This is we have a volatile job market right now. That's not okay. That's not secure. The problem of oil and gas is an insecure job market. We need to broaden the economy, diversify the economy, and that we want a secure transition. That word transition, I'm not sure if it's in my slides for after this, but transition as a term brought up very mixed emotions. I personally try to avoid it. I've probably already used it 10 times in this webinar, so I'm a hypocrite, but I avoid it. But if I need to use it, I make sure that I'm speaking about a transition towards something positive rather than transitioning away from something negative. Transition can bring up those feelings of fear and uncertainty for people who feel their jobs or their well-beings are threatened. So making sure that we're talking about a secure transition towards the good rather than away from bad. That's in quotation marks for anyone who's not looking at their screen. Building. So change is an essential part of life. Natural cycles happen, we evolve, we build. We need to build stronger foundations and spread the load, have more balance. This whole Albertans as industrious and constructive and resourceful comes into this. and okay, there it is, transitioning towards the new, not away from the old or the bad. And showing leadership in being willing to have the hard conversation. Yes, it's hard to have this conversation, but that cannot mean that we just sit in silence, because that leads to disinformation and misinformation. So it's a hard conversation to have, but leaders are able to step up and have this conversation. It's important not to shut it down when it comes up, even if it's uncomfortable. We can navigate this in a way that's functional, and respecting everyone's point of view along the way. So I'll leave you with 10 principles. There's no way to blast through these all in a way that you'll remember, so I'm just going to leave you with my slides. But always leading with respect of who you're talking to, always validating the person. If they are having questions or concerns, validate their questions. Questions are important. Build messages from their values and their keywords that they are using. So listen to how they need to talk, and then engage with them on that level. Use their narratives, their language, draw support from their trusted sources. That's going to change per group. My own dad, if it comes from David Attenborough, he will listen. If it comes from Greta Thunberg, he will not listen. So just choose your sources based off of your audience. I love my dad. I hope he's not listening. Take people as far as they're willing to go. So if you disagree with someone, you're not going to take them from their perspective to your perspective in one conversation, but maybe you're going to take them 1 inch closer to you. And that is a success. That is enough. And you have done a great job when you've taken someone and found a tiny bit more common ground. So manage your expectations of the goals of the conversation. and speak to climate actions that align with the audience's values and strengths. So speak to what they want to talk about, and make sure you bring it back to positive outcomes, even though it is challenging. And finally, test it. If it doesn't work, change it up a little. Keep trying, test it again. And oh yeah, so just to wrap up, that's everything I'm going to speak to today. We will do questions afterwards. On the website, you can do a way deeper dive into this if you find this content useful. We have the first report, which is just a meta narrative of generally what works for Alberta. This is what we just overviewed today. We have the second report, which goes into the sub narratives, and it's broken down per audience and how you can engage with each audience. And then we've got our communications tools, which are my favorite because no one has time to read a 70-page report before they have a conversation. So we've just made some at a glance, easy to use tools that are on the website now too, and they're free to download. And that says questions, but we'll do questions after Hilary. Over to you, Hilary.
Thank you. I'm just going to get my screen up here. Here we go. Okay, can everyone see that okay? I'm going to assume yes.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. So we're just going to do a 10-minute sort of 90-degree turn from what Laura was talking about just now. I'll start off with a really brief introduction to Y2Y. So the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative is about 25 years old. We're based here in the Bow Valley in Canmore, and our mission is to protect and connect habitat from Yellowstone to Yukon so that people and nature can thrive. And so we're the only large landscape organization that focuses on this area as a whole, this whole 2,000-mile long region. And generally, we take a scientific and a collaborative approach to highlight local issues that have broader implications for the whole region. And we work with key locals to sort of stitch this landscape together. So just a framing point here. Although we don't, as an organization, focus directly on transition to renewables or sort of the energy transition side of things, our work does address the mitigation of an adaptation to climate change, but through landscape conservation. So a small portion of our current work is actually addressing CO2 emissions directly in the sense that we are actively engaged on the Vista Mountain mine expansion near Hinton in Alberta, and that one is a thermal coal mine. Our primary concern there is more about the landscape level effects and the effects on waterways, but that's one tie-in right there. But generally speaking, we seek to ensure that large tracts of land are protected or managed for ecosystem values. And the land often has value for both above and below ground carbon storage as corridors for climate or as climate refugia, so areas that are less likely to change in temperature as the climate warms over time, for species that are adapting to a warming climate. And we also focus a lot on headwater systems to ensure that as the climate warms, we still have water supplies through Alberta, but also into the prairies. So those are the areas in which we focus on climate conservation. And I also want to acknowledge that conversations about climate and energy transitions are really particularly fraught, I think, because there's a lot of fear around them. And so I don't want to equate some of the more challenging conversations that we have around conservation with climate conversations, because I think they're two different sort of beasts. So I don't want to make a full equivalency, but I think there's probably some learnings from some of our experiences. So I'm trained as a scientist. And when I came to Y2Y, so my doctoral degree is in ecology. And while I did my degrees and sort of really up until I joined Y2Y 5 years ago, I had very little formal communications training. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I wasn't very interested in it either. So I didn't really feel the need to explain my research to broad audiences. And so I have been learning on the job. And it's been an amazing learning curve since I've started. There's been trial and error. I've learned from mentors and experts, and I've had a little bit of formal training now that I've been doing this for as long as I have. And so I thought that the best way to sort of introduce what I've learned is through the lens, not necessarily as how Y2Y communicates, but as the lessons and the trials and errors that we've had as a team over the last 5 years or so. That's the framework here. So I'll start by, I'm going to focus on 4 simple learnings. And although they probably look simple, I think that they're actually nuanced. So there's more nuance than initially appears. But the first will be to remember who your audience is. Second, accepting that difficult conversations are uncomfortable, but needed and required. Connecting on values and focusing on common ground. And being honest and being patient. Okay, so in terms of the audience, we know that there are, 15 to 20% of the population who are going to be unmovable on a particular controversial issue. So whether we're talking about climate change or landscape conservation or vaccinations or safe injection sites, there's going to be a proportion of the population who are not open to the conversation and who have taken a position, and they're not going to be moved from that position. And so we don't focus on those people. And it sounds simple, but it can be fairly complex because it actually means ignoring sort of the bluster and some of the noise that we hear from that side of folks with really strong opinions on things, who don't like conservation or for whatever reason don't think there's value in our approach. It means that we can't get very caught up in responding to those folks because they're not going to move. And it's actually taking away our energy from really focusing in on the target, which is the 85% of people who are either on side already and need to, be reminded or need to understand the value of taking action, or people who are not on side, but are at least open to having a difficult conversation and learning new things. So that's a big learning for us, especially with the world of social media and trolls and folks who can anonymously weigh in on things all the time. It's not worth putting energy into those folks. Once we've identified the folks that we do want to work with, which again is the vast majority of the population, we then start tailoring the language to the different stakeholders that we're engaging with. I think some really good examples for us are, I've stopped using, oftentimes, depending on the conversation, but certainly with rural folks and ranchers and even, I guess, some coal mine workers and some oil and gas folks. I don't talk about biodiversity. I talk about plants and animals. I'm not talking about, I'm not assuming they know what I mean by habitat connectivity, whereas I might have before. I'm explaining, in straightforward terms, exactly what I'm talking about. And there's this fine line between, assuming that folks understand the jargon versus being patronizing because you're explaining too much. And so it's about really walking that balance and reading the room to understand where you should land. Similarly, there are times when I'm not the right messenger. And, Laura brought up that that experts are not necessarily seen as trusted in certain cases. And I would take it even further to say recent research has shown that both experts, quote unquote experts, and scientists are neither considered amongst the most trusted messengers. And instead, ranchers, farmers, and members of Indigenous nations are seen as more trusted, generally by Albertans. And so when there's an opportunity, we will help to amplify those other voices and take a backseat ourselves so that it's not, it's not coming from us, because there's not value in that at times, depending on the situation. So difficult conversations. Our team, and there are a few of us working on the Alberta team at Y2Y, has really needed to accept that difficult conversations are needed and necessary. And that means that whole flip-flopping stomach, heart racing, dry mouth feeling is part and parcel of the job. And it doesn't mean that they get more comfortable over time necessarily. It doesn't mean that we get better at them or that we're ever skilled at them. But we need to do them in order to actually make change. And so, understanding that this is how it has to be has actually been really helpful. It's helped to sort of tone down some of the emotions around it. How are we doing that? How are we having those conversations? Well, a lot of it is about listening, and it's that true deep listening where you're not formulating a response in your head as you're listening. You're actually taking the time to digest and understand what the other person is saying. We've had to learn to sort of depersonalize these interactions. So the anger and the frustration that we might be feeling from the other side is not directed at us personally. It's about, you know, circumstances or systems, or, you know, in some cases other folks. But it's not about us, and we're the recipient of it, and we're sort of working through it in the conversation. But it's about sort of depersonalizing that, and that makes a big difference as well. Relationships and respect. The really understanding that that other person's perspective is valid because it's based on their experience. It's very similar to the exercise that that Laura went through just now. So empathy building and putting yourself into their shoes, and really kind of being real and vulnerable and acknowledging when they have a point. And the reason I'm showing these images here is we've been talking a lot with folks in Southwest Alberta in these rural communities in Crow's Nest Pass, and they remind us often that their communities are built on coal. And we 100%, coal played a really pivotal role in formation of your town, in your history. Like your family might go back generations and they might have been coal miners. At the same time, there's room for thinking about what's next and really talking about acknowledging and being grateful the role it played, similar to what Laura said earlier about oil and gas, and then recognizing that there's an opportunity to move forward, thinking about how future generations might look back and, you know, understand how these transitions were made, and that, you know, the value of actually moving forward. So acknowledging the points, I think, is very important, and the opportunities. So connecting on values and finding common ground. This for us has been, you know, it's key, and it sort of ties in with the empathy piece. But I guess a great example here is, you know, I took a course on negotiations training a couple of years ago, and it was focused specifically on environmental dispute resolution. And the facilitator argued that, you know, in fact, every conversation you have with anyone is actually a negotiation of sorts. If it needs to result in a decision, whether it's about what to make for dinner or where to go tomorrow, it's a negotiation. And the goal is always to determine the best possible mutual gain scenario for everyone involved. And so the way to start doing that is to understand where the person's coming from and what their values are, rather than locking yourself into a position. And this allows you to come up with creative solutions that might work, you know, on all levels. And so we've been doing that as best we can with the folks that we interact with. And my examples right now are pretty heavy in the South because we're working a lot on the coal issue. And so there are some great examples of us. Recently, we went and we met with the Southern, it's a Sustainable Communities Organization, and we asked them for a letter of support for a project we're doing in Southwest Alberta about exploring how their economy might benefit from nature-based economies rather than simply extractive industries. And it turns out that one of the folks in this group is a coal miner, comes from a coal mining family, and, you know, quickly started, I think, taking the position that we weren't valuing the contribution that they had made. And so we sat down and we met on the sort of the level of values, and we realized that, you know, the things that we had in common were a love of nature, a love of water, and this, you know, these strong family ties. And once we kind of made those connections clear and understood kind of, you know, that was the perspective on which the position of being pro-coal and against sort of exploring different diverse opportunities to diversify economies was, we were able to connect and get a lot further. And, you know, the tension kind of died down. In the end, the group ended up actually providing us a letter of support for that grant, which felt great, I'll admit it. And you don't need to agree on everything to achieve mutual gains. The reason I've got a picture here of an overpass is that, you know, not everyone believes that we need to have connected grizzly bear populations across highways. You know, that might not be a reason for them to spend taxpayer money on an overpass, but they may agree or actually value the fact that we should reduce human-wildlife collisions on the roads, and that the opportunity to keep people safe is actually worth putting money into. So we don't need to agree on the exact reason for doing something. If we can find a workaround or another common value, we go for it. So finally here, I just wanted to talk about being humble and being patient and taking the time to acknowledge and apologize for mistakes and missteps. An example here for us is we recently hired an Indigenous consultant to help us to build relationships with neighboring Indigenous nations, basically Indigenous nations with traditional territory in the Eastern Slopes. And we sort of had this work plan laid out, and the intention was for him to reach out to different nations and help to form some basic connections that we could then build the relationships from there. And he very quickly said, you know what, you guys aren't ready for this. We need to start at treaty, and you need to have a better understanding of treaty before I'm willing to do that on your behalf. And he was right. You know, it was one of those instances in which we had a plan and we wanted to move forward. And he said, no, you know, we dove quite deeply into the colonial history of Alberta. And we decided to start at square one, which was treaty. So patience was key and still is key. And that's how it has to work. And so we recognize that. We committed the time to do things right in that instance. I'm recognizing that we're running out of time, so I'm just going to jump very quickly to the Bow Valley. In general terms, we've had a lot of sort of controversial issues pop up in the Bow Valley recently with development proposals. There's always human-wildlife coexistence challenges. We have a lot of tourists and folks recreating in our corridors and our slopes. And so there's no shortage of challenges that we're facing right now. And I think a lot of the principles that I just introduced apply to our work in the Bow Valley, but I think there's a ton of opportunity for growth as well. So growth in terms of making sure that all folks in the Bow Valley of all demographics and racial backgrounds and incomes are consulted and involved in these discussions, because that's not always the case and not often the case. And also in making sure that the conversations are more transparent, so that we understand, the community understands why decisions are being made. And Wide-Awide's role, I think, is to help convene some of those conversations as we go forward. And if anyone has thoughts on some of those, I'd love to talk about those too. So that's it for me. Love this final example of really, really good communication. This bird took a moment to understand how this man needed to be communicated to, and clearly laid out his needs and advocated well for himself. So I think we'll leave it at that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Hilary. That was a funny graphic to end with. And thank you to Laura too for both of your really engaging presentations. Keeping to time, we probably have time for one, maybe two questions. So I'll invite folks to throw your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I'll pass it over to Hilary and Laura to be able to answer those. So we'll just give it a minute for you to think about those questions, and they can take it from there.
I also realized that I spoke a couple minutes over time and ate up some question time, so I'm happy to stay a little longer if there's any pressing questions that we haven't had the chance to address. Or we just get no questions and call it a night. Give it a minute.
Can I ask you a question, Laura? One of the things that I was wondering is what the next steps for the Narratives Project are, if any, or if that's done.
I've spent the last year and a half trying to disseminate the results of the reports as far and wide as possible, and now I've developed these new at-a-glance tools which I'm trying to disseminate, and the next steps are going to be, I think, for us to create a shared narrative around net zero in Alberta and take our learnings from this and try to get ahead of any potentially polarizing commentary on net zero, and instead drive the narrative in a way that's inclusive and depolarizing before we ever even get to that point. So my hope is driving the net zero conversation.
Okay.
You've got
Awesome.
a Three Sisters question.
Oh, we do? Oh. Is it possible for Three Sisters to develop and yet have a functioning animal corridor? Yeah, so that's a really great question. I would say yes, it is. I do think that, especially around Three Sisters Village, if the footprint was shrunk down to approximately where the cabin line has been laid out, and north of that, that the land south of that line could be added to the wildlife corridor, and that would be sufficient through that area for animals to continue to move. Smith Creek is a bit trickier. It's, again, I think that it's possible. I think that the development would need to be scaled back a lot in terms of its encroachment on the slopes. So I think it's possible, and I think that there are a lot of creative solutions, and there's a lot of people willing to examine those creative solutions. We've been talking about it, like the idea of a design charrette, where a bunch of folks get together and put their heads together with some innovative green designs to see if they're, what ideas pop up basically that would still meet the town's needs and the developers' needs.
And Hilary, we have some questions also popping up in the chat here.
Okay.
One that jumps out at me, and I don't know that I have a great answer, is do either of you have an example of a conversation that did not end well?
Oh yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, we met with a number of forestry companies a couple of years ago, and that was a very challenging meeting, and everyone left at very clear standstill, and emotions were high, and there was no resolution to that particular conversation. I think in retrospect, a number of things could have been done differently, and I think on both our side and the forestry company's sides. And it's not always like that. That's just one example, but that I remember the feeling of that one really clearly, like having a red face my whole drive home. Yeah.
I feel like I must have had a couple. I mean, sometimes some people will also just approach you and they don't intend to find common ground. They just want to use you as an outlet for some emotion, and there's not a lot you can do except for just trying to remove yourself, and saying that as someone who works with Pembina. But there's one question. I'm not sure I totally understand the context, but seeing both of you present from different backgrounds, working in two different settings, does it mean we're going into more of a city/oil and gas and mountain nature Bow Valley collaboration? First of all, I should make clear, I'm presenting from Canmore. I'm technically based in Calgary, but the pandemic hit and I left town. I'm not sure I totally understand the context there. Hilary, how would you interpret that?
No, Natalie, if you wanted to come off of mute and explain your question, that we're open to that for sure. I think that's available.
In order to do that, Natalie, you'd need to raise your hand and I can allow you to speak. We are short on time. We only have 2 minutes left. So Natalie, I'll unmute you, and then I think that'll be our last question. So Natalie, you should be good.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds vague, but it's, yeah. Because I was in oil and gas as well. I live in Calgary, and I thought, Laura, you were in Calgary as well, because you work with the Pembina and with all these companies. Yeah. I used to be with Imperial, and I find there's often, yeah, there's a bit of a gap, right, or a difference in the mentality in the Bow Valley and in the city, and I understand you're trying to complete or to fill that gap with communication, which is usually the goal with communication. So that's amazing work you ladies are doing. Keep at it. Yeah, I was just hoping there's more work like this to be done, and that will continue. Coming from Europe, I've always admired Alberta and loved Alberta and felt the security is amazing for the oil and gas jobs, and now this is not anymore. So yeah, the discussion is changing. So amazing work. Keep at it. My question was, will you continue to collaborate that way, right? there's a great need for that. You know, I have a neighbor, she's super concerned about the coal mining. So she's, you know, we follow both groups. I follow the Y2Y on social media. You know, I'm concerned as a hiking guide as much as I used to be on oil and gas. And when I couldn't be a hiking guide, so anyway, I'm digressing, but just to say we need to fill that gap. We need to go forward, and we need to, yeah, that's so valuable what you're doing and what you're teaching us. And me as a hiking guide now, it's amazing.
That's great.
I'm
Thanks
hoping
for
for more
attending.
collaboration, more work like this. The narrative
Yeah.
needs to change. Like we need to go on. There's so much more work to be done in Alberta.
And thanks for attending as a hiking guide too. I think you have a really unique opportunity to have these conversations in a depolarizing way. So I hope that we were helpful for you. And yes, it is my personal goal to continue collaborating with Pembina and the Bow Valley more and more, and just to bridge those gaps. So thanks, Natalie.
Thank you so much. What a great way to end, Natalie. You took everything out of my mouth. So I guess I'll just say thank you both so much for joining us this evening to have this really important conversation about communication. And, you know, as a young person, I really enjoyed learning some of the tools and tips for being able to communicate effectively with my neighbors. You know, I heard that we have to listen and we have to have gratitude and respect, and sometimes we have to depersonalize and we have to listen. So just thank you so much to both of you. I am going to turn it over finally to Shannon, who just has a couple closing remarks from Bow Valley Climate Action now.
Thanks, Alyssa. Alyssa, would you mind sharing that last slide, please, if you don't mind? Thank you. So as Alyssa said, a huge thank you to Laura Hughes with the Pembina Institute and to Hilary Young from Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. We're so grateful to you, each of you, for your generosity and sharing your time this evening. I really appreciate each and one of you who were able to join us and contribute your ideas through the chat and the great questions. If anyone knows of others who are interested in this conversation but weren't able to attend in person, as Alyssa noted, this webinar was recorded and will be available on the Bow Valley Climate Action Facebook page and hopefully our website as well in time. I would like to say an enormous thank you to the Bow Valley Climate Action volunteers who have worked hard to make this happen, and in particular to Alyssa, who is the lead organizer. And we're incredibly grateful to the Banff Camera Community Foundation, who is the main funder for this particular event, but also the other educational events that will be coming forward this year on the topic of climate action, and to the town of Banff that will be supporting this work as well. If you are so inclined, Bow Valley Climate Action is always very grateful for any donations. It helps us to cover the cost for putting on events such as this. There is an opportunity to donate on our webpage, bowvalleyclimateaction.org. And both the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative and Pembina Institute are also charitable organizations. They will even be able to give you a tax receipt, I presume, which we are not able to do as just a nonprofit organization. But I do encourage you to follow their excellent work and to consider donating if you're so inclined. And something I would just like to say, it's something that struck me the last 2 weeks in Canada have felt to be, at least to myself, and I think I speak for others in conversation I've had, it's been a very troubling and concerning time, ranging from the discovery of the 215 children's bodies at the old Kamloops Residential School to the family in London, Ontario that was killed in a hate crime, and all of the other things in between, from trials related to a person that threw a truck hitch out of a window and killed an Indigenous woman in Ontario. There's all these things that have been going on in our midst. And I think I would just encourage each and every one of us, these tools that both Laura and Hilary have shared with us this evening around how to have difficult conversations, for us to use them in these ways we've spoken about tonight, but also to try our very best in the best way we can to have the courage to also have the difficult conversations around racism, around structural discrimination and inequities, and to do our best as a society. It will be through having these difficult conversations and moving forward and calling out racism that we will move forward on these other topics together as well. So huge thank you to each of you for being here this evening and for your involvement. And we look forward to, hopefully maybe the next time we have an event, it will be able to be in person, which would be really exciting. Our next educational event will be in the fall. So thanks for being with us tonight. And thank you, Laura and Hilary.
Thanks for having us. Have a good night.
Good night.